welcome to Katrina's Creations. This is the Wednesday edition. Today we are going to talk about how to fix those pesky knitting errors and how to rip back without ripping out your entire project. So let's get started. So the first thing we are going to talk about is going to be preventing having to rip things out all the way to the beginning. If you're doing especially like a lace pattern, this is a group of yarn overs. It's called mesh or eyelet, but there's other different styles of lace that you could deal with. And if you make a mistake, it's very hard to rip this back and pick up where the yarn overs and things are. So what I have found is by putting in a lifeline, it saves you a lot of time. So I'm going to show you what a lifeline is. Now these are fixed circular needles. But if you have a set of interchangeable knitting needles, they will have a hole right here at the bottom where the cord connects. And you can actually thread embroidery floss or dental floss or a very lightweight, like fingering weight yarn through that hole, and then you can knit across the row and it will carry that yarn through all of those yarn overs. But if you're dealing with something like this with this fixed needle, so this is like permanently attached, this doesn't detach. What I do, now I'm using very large yarn and needles and things today so you can really see this well. But I thread the darning needle, and now I have a row here that has, these are yarn overs here and these are knit two togethers. And I am simply going to thread this needle right through these stitches. Just like this. I'm just going to leave this like this, and I will continue knitting for the next 5 to 10 rows where I will do this again. If I discover I have a mistake, then all I have to do is pull out the rows until I get to this. The stitches are actually being held as live stitches by the yarn that is threaded through. So you would only have to, instead of ripping all the way back, you would only have to rip back to where the last yarn lifeline is. So that is one way to save yourself. In fact, I'm going to pull these, I'm going to pull the needle out so you'll see what I'm talking about. These stitches are now held on, it acts just like a cord on your knitting needle. So they're not going anywhere, and if I had knitting above this, I would just rip out until I got to this point, and these stitches are held, and then I can just pick these stitches right back up by weaving them right back in again, and I'm ready to go. So that is a lifeline. Now we're going to talk about the most common errors, which would be dropped stitches or mistakes in our knitting. All right, here I have a regular row, and before I begin this, I want to show you how stitches are held on a needle, because this does make a big difference. If you look closely at a stitch, let's see if I can pull it apart here. Here's one stitch. You'll see that it has a leg on both sides that straddles the needle itself. The leg that is to the right, you want to be in the front. So if you were to rip stitches off, like if you just pull them out like this and start ripping back your stitches like this, when you put them back on, you're going to want to make sure that that front leg of the stitch is on the right. So you can just pick your stitches back up. This is the easiest way to rip out, is just to rip out and put them back in. You could do the Lifeline like I just showed, so you don't rip back too far or have the stitches continue to pull out. But you're just going to slide them on, and you want to make sure that that right leg of the stitch is facing in the front. Now I'm going to intentionally drop a couple of stitches here because we're going to go back and fix them in a minute. Alright, my stitches are on, but you can see, especially when you look here, that oops, I have a dropped stitch and it's run down. I don't want it to continue running down. You can use a stitch marker, or if you don't have one handy, a paper clip will do, a safety pin, anything like that. And you just slide it on here. It just keeps it, you can see I've got it right here, it's blending in, but it just keeps the stitch from continuing to drop down. I'm going to knit to where the hole is. Okay, this is where my crochet hook comes in handy. Now you can see there is what's called laddering. This is where the stitch dropped through. So you can see I've dropped 3 rows of stitches. And you can see this is the first one, this is the second, and this is the next one up. So I'm going to grab my crochet hook and I'm going to hook it right into that stitch. I'm going to go to the first ladder and I'm going to grab that ladder and I'm going to pull it right through. So there's one row fixed. Now the next row, you can see these were purled stitches. So I'm not going to go in through the front like I did here and grab it and pull it through. I'm going to move the ladder to the front and I'm going to go through the back. See if I can turn this so you can see it. There's the back, and here's that ladder that I've moved to the front, and I'm going to pull it through. And now you can see, looking at it, that it looks just like the other purled stitches. And then the last one that is dropped, which is right here, is again facing forward, so I'm just going to keep my crochet hook in facing forward, grab the ladder, pull it through, and slide it onto my left needle. And again, I'm going to slide it on so that that right leg is facing front. And then I can go on knitting my way across. And you cannot see where it was fixed. Another way of fixing a mistake, especially if you don't have to rip back too much. If you've got a lot of ripping back, then your best bet is just ripping it out and putting the stitches back on the way I had showed you. But if it's only a little ways to have to rip back, this is what I would do. It's called frogging, or it's called tinking. Tinking is knitting spelled backwards, and frogging is because you are rip it, rip it, rip it. That's where those two terms come from. So in order to do that, you are going to insert your right needle into the row below the one you're going to be pulling out. Again, you want to make sure that right foot is forward, and you just slip it off the needle and pull that yarn out. So again, you're just coming from the back, going through so that that right foot stays forward, and pull it out. Like I said, this is something if you don't have to rip back too far. But if you have a lot of ripping out, I would take it off the needles. You could put a lifeline in ahead of time if you wanted to, or you can just rip it back, and as you put the stitches back on, just again, you want to make sure that you get the right leg of the stitch on facing forward. So those are ways to fix common knitting errors, and I hope you found it helpful. If you have, please give me a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next video.